The medium is in a way a game with an ambitious mechanic for a small studio like Bloober, but in another way is a sloppy and unpolished experience full of little problems that snowball from the beginning to the end. Let's start by clarifying something important. This is not really a horror game, despite its promotional material and ambitions to be the new Silent Hill. The game only holds a few horror components that, as we progress, will start to either disappear or become secondary. One of those components comes with its use of fixed camera angles, reminding us of some classic horror games while composing some dazzling shots or by enhancing aesthetic elements in the backgrounds, generating a rich atmosphere. Although at times they can be disorienting and are never as intriguing as the ones in Silent Hill, the camera itself gives this game a lot of personality that makes it stand out from other modern horror games. However, its potential is wasted when the game doesn't use its camera to guide the player towards certain objects in a location, just like the classic horror games used to do. And while the game uses the main character's gaze to distinguish some of the items that we can actually interact with, most of the time it instead relies on another mechanic called insight. This is just a pretentious name for the generic ability of having a sort of X-ray or detective mode or Witcher senses or eagle vision or listen mode or whatever it is called in some new game. Ultimately, this ability is something present in many other mainstream titles. However, its inclusion here is particularly troublesome for the structure of the game. Its existence in other titles is usually meant to help the player spot and distinguish between different objects one can interact with, as well as easing the task of keeping track of multiple enemies spread around an area, particularly during stealth segments. But that dilemma shouldn't exist in this game. Between the fixed camera, the character's gaze, and the fact that there aren't even that many objects to interact with, this just comes as an unnecessary overkill. However, because very early we are told that there are items hidden around, it quickly turned into something that I have to automatically do all the time without thinking at all, just in case that I was missing something important. But at the end, there are only around 3 objects hidden throughout the whole game that actually required this skill to find them. In another instance, we must use insight to follow some clues lying on the ground, but we can only walk in a linear path with some minor and short deviations, making the ability useless. Its only real use is in some stealth segments, but even those only appear a few times. What particularly bothers me about this case is that it's very clearly something that was included because that is what other popular games are doing. But the game could have been easily modified to delete it. Better yet, it could have become automatic without the need for the player's input. Let's think about it. The protagonist doesn't fully control her powers, often manifesting on their own will. Sometimes ghosts leave signs in the environment, or a real dog will guide us around, and important objects tend to already stand out from the rest. What we have now is instead something that takes away from its own atmosphere and mystery by being so rudimentary and artificial. Puzzles, disappointingly, are also an obstacle that will not make us think a lot. This is not some big brain talk here. In this type of games, puzzles just need to be decently challenging and gratifying to solve. But between the game having a very linear level design and many of the puzzles being quite similar and easy, the result is not particularly satisfying. This is aggravated by the many moments where the game treats us like idiots. Particularly noticeable when we hear the voiceover, utilized here in about the laziest and most boring way possible to bring exposition or point out the obvious.
No one here.
It was no more than 5 to 10 minutes after the very beginning that I started to find the narration annoying.
Oh, Jack's room. But Jack was a humble. Come on, Jack. Jack's waiting. Jack's funeral home. Jack's in the... I could help 1,000 souls cross over, but when it came to Jack, it still hurt like hell.
Game, you don't need to tell me that she's sad when I'm already seeing her cry. As I said, as we progress, the horror elements will start to thin out as the true nature of the game begins to unfold. That of a mixture of point and click with walking simulators. At one point, about halfway through, there is a 10-minute long cinematic, and after that, puzzles and stealth completely disappear for about 2 hours in favor of just walking around, collecting some pieces of the narrative. I don't personally have a problem with those types of games. In fact, one of the moments that I enjoyed the most in the medium had me just exploring a desolated area decorated in tragedy. A rainy night sets a mood, and thunders echo the sound of piano. This created for me the kind of powerful atmosphere that was to be expected in the classic Silent Hills or Resident Evils. But in most other moments, I wasn't convinced that this is the best way to tell this story. And I have the suspicion that the developers became aware of it at some point, as many of the other mechanics felt like meaningless filler between the point and click story beats. This stealth section right here is particularly egregious when it can be completely ignored with literally no consequences. Nonetheless, we still have the most distinctive aspect of this game: the splitting of the worlds and its navigation in parallel. This is a challenging and technically demanding mechanic meant to drastically distinguish the two realities, while we basically have to find a way to interconnect them through a few different methods. But the problem shines once the game makes us do the same couple things over and over again. Give energy to something and listen to the memory of an object. There are some others, much more sparse, ways in which we can interact between the parallel worlds. In particular, the separation of bodies stands out as yet another missed opportunity. By allowing us to come back to our bodies at any moment without limitation or restriction, it removes a lot of the tension that it otherwise could potentially create. The final result is one where we will just ignore half the screen a lot of the time. And when we actually have to pay attention to both sides, it doesn't get past being a gimmick. Even worse yet, this got a patent. So now, a game that has been transparent about the inspiration it took from Silent Hill and Legacy of Kain is forbidding others to take inspiration from itself. Pretty similar to the recent case with Shadows of Mordor. So, if the gameplay is not good, we are left with only the story. How is it? Meh? Despite her motivations and the importance of her powers, the protagonist has a mostly passive role in the story, usually relegated to be the witness of past events where she had no power or influence, and are instead often related to a character introduced in the second half that ended up being much more influential in the story. And the ending, without giving spoilers, is bad. With zero setup, it creates a false dichotomy out of nowhere for an unsatisfying and poorly written conclusion that kind of hints on a possible sequel. So, that was The Medium. Personally, I don't recommend it, but if you already have Game Pass and you are interested in this title, or you are a fan of Akira Yamaoka, then give it a try. After all, it doesn't overstay its welcome with its 8 hours of length. My suggestions to make this game better as a nobody with no experience in game development would be to enhance the relationship of the paranormal with reality, polish the puzzles, make the moments where we do nothing but walk shorter, and cut the monster chasing us. He is more annoying than threatening. That was all from me. Thanks for watching.